Hey y'all. I've had a busy morning out, so I'm actually recording this later in the day than I usually do. So I'm just going to jump into the reading. All right, so last week we had ended with chapter 23, and they are headed to meet the Ainarans. Yeah, all right, so without further ado, here we go. Daughters Fire and Sea, Chapter 24, Runa. Runa stalked along the ship's railing, avoiding the eyes of anyone who looked at her. Eleanor's displeasure was like a sore in her gut, souring her stomach and filling her with a restlessness she couldn't shake. They're weak and cowardly, Eleanor railed inside her head. They've corrupted your mother, turned her against your people, slit their throats before they poison and betray you. I'm not killing anyone, Runa hissed beneath her breath. She paused by the rigging that ran up along the mainsail's edge to the crow's nest above, and wrapped her fist around one of the thick ropes. The coarse fibers grated against her palm, and Runa twisted her hand, fixating on the sensation. It helped her focus. She breathed in the salty air and held it in her lungs, feeling the pressure deep inside her chest. As she let her breath go, Runa tried to relax the tight muscles in her neck and back. It was becoming harder to ignore Eleanor's contempt. Runa's own emotions were raw and confused, tangling with Eleanor's and riding the ancestors' focused anger, until Runa wanted to set everything on fire and lash out at anything nearby. It's not me, Runa thought, twisting her hand around the rope. This isn't me. She stared into the wind, feeling it brush across her skin. Why are you here? Runa asked, her voice soft. No one was nearby to overhear, but she still kept her face turned away, not wanting the crew to think she was talking to herself. A white seabird with a hooked beak and spots of orange on the tips of its wings dove down into the water nearby, rising with a silvery fish in its mouth. Don't trust them, Eleanor said. They'll become afraid of you when they realize your potential, your power. They'll try to drown you, feed you to the coward Sereth's beasts. The captain is family. He's my uncle. He's not of the blood. Go away, Runa hissed, glaring at the bird as it ripped the fish apart in midair. I don't want you. Of course you do, little burner. Who else will tell you about magic? Who else will bring you power? I know what you want, stupid girl. Why seek me out in the first place? Runa asked. You don't only wish to train me, which you haven't been doing much of, by the way. You have another reason. Eleanor shifted in her head. Rendashar has grown weak, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Rakarn has yet to crush the Sireni. The war's end has been in his hands for years, and he's been unable to bring them to heel. The Sireni mock him, spit in his eye, burn our fleet. Never in our entire history have we lost all our ships. Eleanor cursed Elena again, her fury snapping across Runa's mind as she railed against her mother. Runa laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You think I'll do what my grandfather hasn't? Your fire will rival the dragon's. You are strong, though untrained. I could feel you when you first stepped inside the veil. Feel your power, your anger. You wanted vengeance. You wanted strength. I don't want to kill the Sireni. Runa tightened her hand on the rope, focusing on the pain. I want to end the war. I want those in power to stop crushing the weak beneath their feet. Do you think it's the people who keep the war going? No, it's the nobles and the administrators who turn the wheel. They don't care who's crushed beneath it or how much blood is spilled. They want power and money. They're greedy. Runa paused, realizing she'd grown louder. She glanced over her shoulder and caught the passing gaze of a young man. The boy swallowed at her aggressive expression, his eyes nervously dancing away. I can help you, Eleanor said. She sounded eager, excited by Runa's loss of control. I can shape you. I can make you a weapon. I won't fight your war, Runa hissed. Your revenge is not mine. Eleanor shifted in her mind, perhaps deciding if she wanted to push further. Instead, the ancestor drifted back, her presence weakening. We'll speak again, she said, then disappeared. Runa sagged against the railing, feeling drained. She still felt angry, but it was old, familiar anger, the anger she couldn't seem to let go of since her mother had left her and Lyric. Even now, after Elena had come back, there was something new for Runa to rail against. Her mother's injury, her ancestors' manipulation, Lyric's distractions. Surprised, Runa realized she was mad at Lyric. Not enraged, but disappointed. Lyric was drifting away from her, drifting to Kel. What would happen after they allied with the Ainarans and sought an end to the war? Runa and Lyric wouldn't return to Ele's Hollow. They'd be important, caught in the heart of negotiations. Would they seek a place in Rendishar or sanctuary with Cyrene? Lyric seemed to be enjoying their time on the Talon, but Runa couldn't imagine living at sea at the mercy of the water and weather. She didn't like the constant sway and the lack of solidness beneath her feet. She didn't like how far away the mountains were and how deep and wide the water stretched around them. What would happen if their ship drifted so far from land that she could no longer see it? And Kell, Runa doubted he'd go back to whatever he'd been doing before Elena scooped him up and sent him after them. Kell would follow Lyric, or she would follow him. Sometime in the future, they'd leave Runa behind. It was inevitable. Women married and created new families of their own. What place would be left for Runa then? She wouldn't trail after them like a shade. What did she want for herself? Jealousy and loneliness wrapped their arms around her, ripping open the old wound Elena had left in her wake all those years before. It could get worse. Runa hadn't thought that it could. Rue? Runa jumped, hand raising as she spun around. She flushed, embarrassment heating her skin, then anger chased it away. What? She snapped, glaring into her sister's face. I just wanted to see if you are well, Lyric said, eyes flaring. Her cheeks flushed an angry pink. I'm fine. Fine. I'll be with Hallie if you need me. Lyric stormed away, the hurt plain on her face. Lie, Runa's voice trailed off as Lyric climbed into the ship's bow. Feeling miserable, angry, and frustrated, and wanting to scream, Runa turned back to the deep water. She tangled her fingers in the ends of her braid and pulled hard, feeling pain as her hair tugged on her scalp. Let us get there soon, Runa thought desperately, before I set fire to this whole cursed boat. The sky was clear when Captain Elodin anchored the Talon in a large cove along the Ionaran coastline. Their trip, which should have been a week, had taken mere days, Hallie's skill with the storm propelling them faster than a mageless vessel. There was no hint of a city or village, or even a dock for their ship. All Runa could see was an unbroken line of trees curving along the beach like a living wall. The forest was massive, the trees lush and green, and they rolled away from the beach as far as Runa could see. Mountains stood in the distance, jutting up from the sea of green like tiny spikes. Captain Elodin's crew lowered a skiff lashed to the Talon's side, and Runa, Lyric, and Kell climbed down into it via a rope ladder. Elodin and 3 other crew members joined them. Laerdy, who Runa was familiar with, a woman named Sashala with tightly coiled black hair and dark skin, and a bald man named Taith with pink coloring, bony shoulders, and the widest grin she'd ever seen. Taith seemed unable to force his face into anything other than a broad smile, and Runa could see every single gold-capped tooth inside his mouth. The wind caller, Hallie, was staying behind on the Talon. Elodin had given her command of the ship in his absence. Hallie gestured something at Lyric, who smiled and raised a hand in return. Then Runa felt a tingle of power dance across her skin. The boat surged away from the ship, propelled by an unseen hand, letting them flow right up onto the beach without once needing to lift an oar. Before the boat had ceased moving, Sashala leaped out onto the sand, landing cat-like on her feet. She hauled the boat farther out of the water, away from the hungry tide that sought to drag them back out to sea. Captain Elodin vaulted out of the boat with impressive vigor, followed by Taith, Laerdy, and Kell. Unlike Elodin's dramatic exit, Kell's landing on the pale sand was markedly less agile. Despite his awkwardness, Lyric beamed when he reached back to help her, and she lingered in his arms as he took an unnecessary amount of time to set her down. Rolling her eyes, Runa avoided Taith and Laerdy's outstretched hands and climbed over the side without assistance. Her feet splashed into the shallow water, splattering wet sand across her skirt. Ignoring her dirtied hem, Runa stomped purposefully up the beach. She realized they weren't alone as she approached the trees. Men and women stood within the shadow of the forest, as silent and unmoving as the trees themselves. They were tall, like Khalisans, though thinner and darker than the folk back home, with warmer undertones to their skin. Some of the figures wore dark green trousers and shirts, with longbows on their shoulders, and others wore pale robes of undyed cloth. One of the robed people, a tall woman with long dark brown hair, raised her hand in acknowledgement as Captain Elodin called out a greeting. This way, Elodin said quietly, heading towards the woman in the trees. Taith stayed behind with the boat, presumably guarding their exit, and Sashala and Laerdy fell into step behind Runa, Lyric, and Kell as they trailed after Elodin. The captain seemed relaxed when they stepped up in front of the tall woman and gave her a pleasant smile, which she returned with apparent familiarity. Up close, Runa could see the woman was in her middle years and quite beautiful. Faint lines were etched around her eyes, but there was a youthfulness to her tawny face that made her seem younger. Runa, years her junior, felt envious of the woman's radiating energy. Though the woman's robe was unadorned, she wore a striking woven belt knotted around her waist, spun from purple, green, and gold threads. "Lena Dara," Captain Elodin said, "it's good to see you again." "Elodin?" The woman's voice was husky. "My shade and water are yours." Her bright green eyes shifted to regard Sashala, Laerdy, and Kel, and she nodded at them before moving on to Lyric and Runa. "Welcome, daughters of fire and sea. My shade and water are yours. I am Lena Dara, High Priestess of the people of Greenhome. Your journey has been long. I will share refreshments with you if you wish it." "With all of us, I hope?" Runa asked, eyeing Lena Dara. There was something about the woman that immediately put her on edge, but she couldn't figure out what it was. "Of course," Lena Dara said, smiling. "I have refreshments for all of you." Lyric elbowed Runa. "Thank you for the welcome. I'm Lyric Greymorn, and this is my sister Runa. Have you been expecting us?" She glanced at Elodin. "Did our uncle send word we were coming?" It was a good question, Runa thought. Elodin had told them when he'd sent a Gold to help Elena, but he made no mention of contacting Lena Dara ahead of their arrival. "There wasn't time," Elodin said. "I apologize for the surprise. I knew we'd arrive ahead of any message." Runa frowned and looked back at the High Priestess, sharpening her study of the woman's enigmatic face. "How did you know?" she asked suspiciously. "The mother told me," Lena Dara said. "Aya, the mother tree?" Lyric asked. Lena Dara inclined her head, smiling serenely. Runa raised an eyebrow. "It speaks to you." Lyric elbowed her more sharply, but Runa ignored her. "Not aloud, like our conversation now," Lena Dara said, "but she honors a few of us with a communion of minds." "She puts images in your mind?" Lyric asked. Runa thought of Eleonora whispering in the back of her head. Maybe it was similar. Lena Dara inclined her head. "I didn't know the tree was sentient," Runa said. She shifted to the side to avoid another jab from Lyric's elbow. "Of course she is," Lena Dara smiled indulgently. She didn't seem upset by their questions. "Her roots stretch down into Aerith's heart, and her branches reach up into the realm of sky and beyond. She bridges all things. She's the heart of everything." "How would she know we were coming here?" Runa asked skeptically. "We only just decided that ourselves several days ago." "We don't understand all her mysteries," Lena Dara said, "only that she is everywhere." "Ah." Runa wasn't sure she believed a tree could be omnipresent, but she knew there was much about magic and the old gods she didn't know. Perhaps Elodin's Goalmaster, Elverna, had sent ahead a bird without him knowing, or the priestess had somehow heard about their capture in Rathgar's hold and assumed Elodin would rescue them and bring them to Ionar. She glanced sideways at Elodin. It was also possible the captain had shared his intention with Lena Dara, and for some reason wanted to keep this hidden from Runa and Lyric. Why, though? So they'd believe in the magic and power of the Ionarn's tree? It didn't make sense. "Let me take you somewhere to rest," Lena Dara said. "Once I've shared our hospitality, I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have." "Yes," Lyric said, nodding. "Maybe we should get off the beach." "We're being followed," Elodin said. "I rescued Lyric and Runa from another captain's boat, and she'll likely come here with the intent to take them back." Lena Dara nodded. "We'll be ready." She gestured at several of the green-clad figures. "If you'll follow me." Led by the High Priestess, they entered the loamy forest. There was no defined path beneath Runa's feet, and she studied the ground curiously as they walked. It was covered by a leafy green plant that crawled all over the forest floor, giving the appearance that someone had unfurled a lush blanket. Scattered across the thick grass-like plant were tiny blue flowers, catching Runa's eye like scattered jewels that had fallen from someone's pouch. It was verdant and wet beneath the forest canopy, and a diversity of plants bloomed and flourished across the ground, some growing off the sides of tree trunks. Out of habit, Runa studied the plants they passed, seeing some she recognized, but many she did not. Wetter than the umberwood back home, there was more color and vitality here. Something dripped onto her forehead, and Runa jerked her head up, staring into the large leaves overhead. "It's too humid here," she thought, wiping sweat from her face. It felt like standing over a hot pot of water on the stove. Birds trilled from every direction, and the flash of a small white-tailed deer caught her eye. Runa looked at Captain Elodin and his crew to see how they felt about the forest. They looked comfortable, despite being off their ship, moving easily through the damp undergrowth. Their lightweight clothing was breathable and airy, suitable for Ionar's environment. Perhaps that's why they didn't seem to mind it as Runa did. They weren't sweating inside their clothes. Kel and Lyric walked hand in hand, seemingly oblivious to the sweat dampening their faces and hair. Her sister's skirts were still tied up like she was Sereni, and Kel hadn't removed his loose white trousers or the vest, showing off his bare chest. Watching them, Runa narrowed her eyes as Kel's vest shifted across his shoulders. What were those lumps beneath the blue fabric? Had he hidden a weapon on his upper back? Maybe you're smarter than you look, she thought. We're here, Lenadara announced. She'd halted atop a small hill, moving aside so Runa and the others could see past her into the canopied hollow below. Nearly indistinguishable from the lush foliage were a handful of large basket-like structures woven from branches still attached to the trees. With no cleared paths between them, the building seemed more like a collection of nests than anything human-made. Men and women moved around the village on various tasks, their movements unhurried, almost reverent. A man with a basket full of dark purple berries cradled in his arms glanced up and caught Runa's eye, smiling like she were an old friend. This way, Lenadara said. The priestess led them down to one of the structures and held aside a curtain of vines to reveal a doorway. Passing her, Runa stepped beneath a flowering archway into a large circular room. She turned in the center, curiously examining the room. Interwoven branches formed the walls, insulating them from the rest of the forest, and arched overhead in a dome. Softly illuminating the enclosed space were small glowing lights that shifted lazily along the curve of the ceiling. Runa narrowed her eyes. Were they fireflies? Pillows and blankets were arranged around the room, providing comfortable places to sit. Several low tables, crafted from polished pieces of driftwood, held fruit-filled baskets and small figurines woven from pale greenish-blue grass. Turning again, Runa saw a man waiting beside one of the seating areas. She stared at him, distracted by his beauty. He was short, no taller than her or Lyric. Lyric grabbed Runa's arm. He has horns? She murmured. Runa raised a surprised eyebrow. She'd been so distracted by the man's features that she hadn't noticed the small black horns curving out from his golden curls. Fawnborn, Kel whispered behind her. The man, perhaps overhearing, dipped his head with a bemused smile. Small tendrils of steam curled up from the earthen pot in his hands as he poured bright green liquid into 7 small cups. Sit, rest, Lenadara said, gesturing at the circle of pillows beside the horned man. The high priestess seated herself first, lounging against several pale yellow cushions. Eladin sat next, followed by Laerdy. Seshala remained standing with her arms crossed. Lyric and Kel sat down together, and Runa sat beside her sister, ending up right next to the horned man. Setting down the pot, the man picked up a clay cup and leaned over her, holding it out in his hands. Runa blinked and accepted the cup. The man's fingers lingered on hers unnecessarily, but she was too distracted by his long purple-tipped nails to object. I'm Theo, the horned man said as he drew his hand away. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Good day, Runa said, her voice flat. Grinning as if they shared an intimate moment, the horned man moved on to Lyric and Kel and the others. As Runa continued watching him, she saw him give everyone lingering glances and brush their hands with the same familiarity that he'd shown to her. She wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or amused. Kel, predictably, seemed jealous when Lyric accepted her tea, but his irritation quickly shifted to confusion when he received the same close attention. Elida gave Theo a surprisingly friendly grin, the 2 men exchanging an inaudible greeting. Returning her attention to her cup, Runa lifted it to her mouth and inhaled the fragrant steam. It was tea and smelled like the first day of spring, fresh and grassy. Theo handed Lenadara the last cup, then bowed to the room. He caught Runa's eye and winked at her, much to her annoyance, then walked out the door, passing through the curtain of vines and between 2 green-clad Ayanarans who'd slipped inside unnoticed. Eyeing the Ayanarans over her cup, Runa wondered if they were there to prevent them from leaving, or if they were guards for the high priestess. There was nothing overtly threatening about any of the Ayanarans so far, but the uneasy feeling Runa felt when first meeting Lenadara was still there, prickling her skin and drawing her eyes towards the exit. Thank you for your welcome, Lenadara, Lyric said. She tilted her head to the side, her brown braids slipping off her shoulders. You know who we are, so I assume you know our mother? The high priestess sipped from her cup. Not directly, she said, but I know who she is. King Rakarn has worked hard to keep it quiet, but we learned that the crowned princess of Rendishar has been absent from the Scorched Court for over 20 years. The mother, Aya, told us when Lady Elena left, thinking we could be of use to each other. So you know our mother is against Rendishar's war with the Sireni? Lyric asked. Lenadara inclined her head. You called us daughters of fire and sea, Runa interrupted. Why is that? You are children of both bloodlines, Lenadara said. You are of the 3 and Sereth, the sea serpent. Did you tell her? Runa stared at Captain Eladin. Eladin seemed confused, brows knotted over his eyes. I did not. Your uncle didn't betray your secret, Lenadara said. The mother told me of your heritage. Runa raised an eyebrow. How did the mother tree know about her family? The tree, Aya, was said to bridge worlds. Theoretically, you could travel through it to the Vale and Underworld, and other worlds beyond, but she never heard a story about it speaking or communicating with anyone. How conscious was Aya? The tree wasn't divine like the Trinity or demigods, nor a creature like the dragons. It was something else. The old stories did say that Etathira gave part of herself to facilitate Aya's creation. Maybe the Ainarans were talking to an echo of the goddess herself through the tree. Runa rubbed her temple and tried to bring her mind back to the conversation. She was frustrated by how little they knew. How could she and her sister make intelligent decisions about the war, about their lives, when they barely understood their place in the world? We did speak of allying against Rendishar and the Gale, Eladin said, nodding at Lenadara. I discussed it with your mother before she returned for you, but she wanted to keep you hidden. She refused to involve you. Lyric seemed distracted, and then she shifted her attention back to Lenadara with a curious expression. You're willing to stand against both Rendishar and the Sireni. Why? Your land is far from the war. What happens between them doesn't touch you here. Why risk allying with us and getting involved? King Rakarn will likely see your support as a sign you're siding with his enemies. He could turn his eyes on you. Even without his fleet, he has troops, mages. He could probably find a way to come here. Lenadara rested her cup in her lap, fingers curled around it. Aerith is dying, she said. Runa frowned. Dying? She'd seen no sign of disease in the land back home. Eladin cocked his head to the side, his face clouded. Dying? Lyric asked. What do you mean? She gripped Kel's arm. Watching her sister reach for Kel and not her, Runa felt a pang of sadness. The taint, Eladin said, his voice thoughtful. It's drifted farther into the Sea of Screams, away from the tainted shore. The bordering reefs no longer contain it. We've done what we can to shift it back, run it aground with the tide, but we've seen its effect on the fish and animals despite our efforts. At the mention of the shore, Kel grew still beside Lyric. There was a grinding sound beneath his hands as his palms crushed the cup braced between them. Lenadara glanced at him curiously, a calculating look entering her eyes. Yes, she said, after a moment. The taint is growing and spreading beneath the earth like rot along the root. In months or weeks, it will begin to surge to the surface, spreading pockets of death. We've ignored it at our peril, believing it contained Thenda. How do you know? Runa asked. Lenadara raised an eyebrow. Are you asking what evidence I have? Runa nodded curtly, exchanging a look with Lyric, who'd begun to frown. The mother shared visions with me, Lenadara said, a faraway look in her eyes. I have seen what lies beneath the dirt, the death that pools around her roots. Runa steadied her. Whatever the high priestess had seen scared her. What is the taint? Lyric asked. Lenadara blinked, her eyes clearing. She no longer looked visibly shaken, resuming her composure. I cannot say for sure. What we know is that it was released by corrupted magic from a failed ritual that required massive amounts of power. Larity made a pain sound and rubbed a hand across his jaw. Seychala, standing behind him, touched his shoulder. Gravely, Captain Eladin set aside his cup and rested a closed fist on his knee. We weren't sure what it was when it happened, he said. Our screamers and wind callers felt a surge of energy charging the air. Before we could move our ships in to observe, the power exploded outward. It knocked every one of our mages unconscious within a league of the shore. Their noses bled and they suffered vertigo for days afterward. All sea life within range was killed, pulverized. It was weeks before we began to see the taint's effect showing itself as a green tide upon the sea. By then, we realized Thenda was gone. Why didn't you go to them after you felt the surge of power? Lyric asked, eyes wide. After what happened to our mages, the Gale decided we should stay away. They believed someone inside Thenda tried to use dark magic, something old and forbidden. The Gale thought it'd corrupt us, and forbade anyone from helping or looking for survivors. You stayed away? Lyric asked Eladin, her hand tight on Kel's arm. Kel was pale, his face slick with sweat. One hand touched the skin of his throat, pressing against the tattoo. As Runa watched, the blue line writhed and Kel took a shallow breath. No, Eladin said. We went to the shore. A handful of people survived, and we helped them best we could. Most chose to move on, to seek refuge in Olaporio or Rendishar. They wanted to forget, try to start over. Some believed the old ones were displeased and unleashed something against them. Mother felt their pain and suffering, Lenadara said. Who performed the ritual? Runa asked. Was it someone in the Thendan government or a priest mishandling old magic? Lenadara lifted an eyebrow. No, it was King Rakarn of Rendishar. Kel inhaled sharply and leaned forward, his hands surging to his throat. Kel? Lyric's voice was panicked. She put her hand on his back and tried to look into his face. Blood dripped from Kel's nose. Lenadara set aside her cup and stood up, crossing to Kel. She kneeled in front of him. He's bound, she said, voice soft with wonder. I thought you were Nilin, but... The priestess touched Kel's hand, shifting aside his fingers to see the tattoo beneath. You were there. You saw something. What's happening? Lyric asked, torn between staring at Leonadara and Kel's anguished face. Kel's eyes had lost focus, his hands curled into claws against his neck. His mind is trying very hard to keep his memories locked away, Leonadara said. The spell around his throat prevents him from remembering what he saw, who he saw. Rakarn, Runa breathed. What had Kel seen? What would make the king tattoo an 8-year-old boy? Can you help him? Lyric asked. We can't remove the spell, the high priestess said, but we can calm his mind. She stood, gesturing to the guards by the door. One slipped outside. Several minutes passed, and the man returned with 2 robed men. This is Haitha and Bren, Leonadara said, gesturing the robed men over. They'll take your friend to rest nearby. Kel, Lyric said, standing as Haitha and Bren helped Kel to his feet. His name is Kel. I should go with you. Runa, eyeing her sister and the unfamiliar healers, stood up. She wouldn't let Lyric leave her sight, not here where they didn't yet know the Aenaran's intentions. I'll go, Seychala said, pushing down on Eladin's shoulder, who'd started to rise. You need to stay. Kaya will be here soon. You must make your plans. Lyric looked to Runa, eyes large with worry. Reaching for her sister, Runa felt a flicker of terror pass between them, a thread of Lyric's emotions reaching out as she grabbed Runa's hand. Please fetch me if he grows any worse, Lyric said. Seychala nodded. We'll care for him, one of the healers said. Then, supporting Kel between them, they walked him from the room, Seychala trailing behind. Runa tugged Lyric back down to the cushions. Have you received word from our mother? Runa asked, looking at Leonadara. A message that she's on her way? Leonadara, sitting back, shook her head. We've received no communication from her. Herlin will send word, Eladin said. Laerdy nodded. I guess by tomorrow. They're likely on their way here. Runa squeezed her sister's hand, feeling worry rise inside her throat for their mother and Kel. Would Kel be taken from them too? Curiously, she found that the idea of losing him saddened her. He'd helped save their mother, carrying her for hours without complaint up the shore to Ivern. She dragged her mind back to Leonadara's words before Kel's nose started bleeding. You said King Rakarn is responsible for destroying Thenda and for creating the taint. Why would he do that? And why there, Runa thought. Why not in Rendashar? Had their grandfather known how destructive and lethal his attempt could be? Why had Thenda allowed him to perform such a dangerous ritual there? Had they known the risks? Had anyone? The war, Eladin said, his voice rough and brittle. His fierce eyes glittered dangerously. Laerdy, a hulking shape beside him, crushed his cup in one hand, shards of pottery falling between his feet. He blinked at his hands, seeming surprised as green liquid dripped on the floor. Yes, Leonadara said. King Rakarn sought a weapon in his battle with the Sireni. He chose Thenda because the mother's roots run beneath the cliffs of Salta. A weapon? Runa asked. She thought about Eleanor's insistence that she could turn Runa into a weapon. Did the ancestor know what Rakarn had done? He sought to wake the dragons, Leonadara said. The old ones? Lyric asked, her head turning away from the door. The high priestess gave Lyric a measured look. Yes, Rakarn wanted to control them to destroy the Sireni and extend his rule over all of Aerith. How do you know that? Runa asked, narrowing her eyes. Were you there in Thenda? Have you spoken to Rakarn? The mother told us, Leonadara said. Runa's frown deepened. If Rakarn had unleashed dangerous magic atop the tree's roots, it seemed plausible it'd feel what happened. But how could it comprehend the king's desires? How could the mother tree know the thoughts inside Rakarn's head? Had he sought the Aenaran's help in the past? Did they have a connection to Rendashar? But the dragons are gone, Lyric said. Yes, Leonadara said, but they're not far away. They're sleeping within the veil, just as Sarah sleeps beneath the sea, wrapped around the mother's roots. But how would Rakarn know how to summon them? Lyric asked. I can't begin to imagine the power required. I don't know where he learned the spell, Leonadara said, but there is old magic, lost to time, that's capable of bringing the old ones back to the living world. If Rakarn knew the words and had a godchild's blood, it's possible to call the dragons home. Runa tightened her hand on Lyric's. A godchild, like... Again, Eladin said, face bleaching of color. Runa's heart thundered in her ears. Their mother had not mentioned their father when she'd accused Rakarn of destroying Thenda. Did she know? Did she care? Leonadara clasped her hands in her lap and gave Eladin a somber look. It was Again. Rakarn used him in the ritual, but Again fought against it. It was his resistance that resulted in the ritual's failure. Pride for the man she didn't know welled in Runa's chest. He was a fighter, like her. How could you know Again was involved? Eladin asked. Did the Mother Tree tell you, or did Again come to you? Hope kindled in his eyes. You've seen him? He was here? Yes, Lenadara said. He's here now. Runa dropped her empty cup and felt it hit her skirt. Their father was here? What? Elladan exploded to his feet, fury contorting his face. Looking up, Runa saw Laerdy drop the remaining shards of his cup on the ground and shift his eyes towards the guards by the door. He's here with you, and you never told me, Elladan raged. Lenadara held up a calming hand, remaining seated on the ground. He's been here with us for the last few months. He sought our help. He's not well. Runa stared at the high priestess, fury burning in her chest. Why would Lenadara wait to tell them about their father? What game was she playing? What do you mean? Lyric asked. What's wrong with him? When Rakarn's failed spell poisoned the land on which it was cast, it also corrupted your father, Lenadara said. Because of his god blood, Again didn't die or turn into one of the mindless creatures that roam the shore at night, but it changed him. He hungers for power, for magic, and he's tried valiantly not to harm anyone, but his efforts have starved him and broken his mind. I'm afraid Again is more creature than man now. We've done our best to protect him from others and himself, but we cannot reverse the damage. Runa was returned to the shore, her mind replaying the moment the creature ripped open their mother's neck. She could still see the shock in Elena's eyes and hear the sound her torch made when she'd knocked the monster free. I'll kill him, Elladan growled, clenching his fists. Our father? Lyric asked, eyes wide. Rakarn, Runa said, looking at Elladan's angry face. Did Rakarn kidnap him? And why pick our father? She didn't understand. She thought Rakarn hadn't known who their father was, or that he was Sarene. I don't know, Lenadara said. It didn't make sense. Their mother claimed she'd hid Runa and Lyric to protect them from their grandfather. She'd refused to tell them their father's name. Why? To protect him? If she'd been so careful, why was Rakarn so entangled in their lives? Why did he seem to know everything? And Kell? Why not kill Kell? Runa asked. If he witnessed Rakarn's ritual and Rakarn was afraid he'd tell someone, why bother with the spell? Rue, Lyric gasped, wrenching her hand away. Runa gave her sister an annoyed look. I don't think he should have, but it seems excessive to use a complicated spell to silence someone, and a child no less. Why go through all that effort? Our grandfather hardly seems merciful. Maybe he was unable to kill him, Lenadara said. Runa narrowed her eyes. Unable? The high priestess shrugged. Lyric straightened beside her, and Runa eyed her sister's profile. She seemed uncomfortable. Did she know something about Kell? Something Runa didn't. Runa looked back at Lenadara. So, in Rakarn's quest for power, he's doomed us all. Does he know? Lyric asked. Our grandfather? Does he know what he's done? He knows, Lenadara said, which is why none of the kingdoms are aware of his involvement. No one who witnessed the ritual is still alive, besides your father and friend. I can't say, however, if Rakarn is aware the taint has spread, or its danger. Runa frowned. Elladan had said there'd been people who tried to figure out what happened. How had no one found the connection to Rakarn? I wouldn't be surprised if he knows, Elladan said darkly. Has anyone else tried to summon the old ones before? Lyric asked. Runa looked at her sister, raising both eyebrows. What are you suggesting, Lai? Lyric looked at her. No one living knows how to cleanse the taint, right? If someone did, then they would have done it already. Sure, Runa said, narrowing her eyes. But what if the dragons can? Lyric asked. They know magic beyond our understanding. They themselves are magic, and created the runes we use for spells. If anyone can stop the taint from spreading across Aerith, it would be them, wouldn't it? All right, but they're gone, Lai, Runa said. Realization slid coldly down her back. Are you suggesting we try Rakarn's ritual? Think of the risk. Even if we knew a godchild willing to attempt the summoning, remember what supposedly happened to our father? She studied Lyric's face, curious despite her concern. It was odd being the voice of caution. Runa was usually the one taking significant risks and leaping into the unknown. Elladan shook his head. You can't be serious, Lyric. It is possible, Lenadara said, drawing everyone's eyes. You may be able to summon the dragons. And we are going to end there because that is a long chapter and I am really tired today. So yeah, it's really getting exciting now. They have found out their father is alive. They are going to meet him soon, so that is something to look forward to. And they are now thinking about summoning the dragons. Yeah, so Well, I hope that you are enjoying the story so far. I hope that you have a great weekend, and I will be back again with the next chapter. All right, thanks as always for listening. See you later.